earthquakes, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
In our last segment, we were talking about the Center for World Power swinging from the United States, from China, to Europe. The Bible prophesies that's what's going to happen. So what kind of events will pave the way for this to happen? We spoke in our last segment about a man by the name of Strobe Talbott, who said in the 21st century, national sovereignty as we have known it will cease to exist. We'll all answer to a single global authority. When I read that from Time magazine, published in 1992, it alarmed me because I knew the prophecies of the Bible said that was exactly what was going to happen. There was going to be a world government established, and there would be a single authority, just like Talbot said. That single authority would be a man called the Antichrist. I have Talbot's book with me. It's entitled The Great Experiment. Now, Strobe Talbott went on to serve in the State Department with President Clinton. He happened to be Clinton's roommate when they were both Rhodes Scholars in Oxford. So they knew each other very, very well, and they believed the same. Well, Talbot continued to push one world government through the administration of President Bill Clinton. I have his book here. I'd like to read a couple of excerpts from it just so you can get an idea of how much Talbot plainly promoted one world government. He said national sovereignty, as we have known it, will cease to exist in the 21st century. You and I are in the 21st century right now. And the forces that agreed with Strobe Talbot are very much in power around the world today. Let me read a couple of things. This comes from page 4 of the introduction. In all these cases, the UN is exercising, on behalf of all nations, responsibilities and powers that used to be largely, if not exclusively, in the domain of sovereign national governments. So Talbot is admitting that the UN has now taken over many of the responsibilities and the duties of the national governments. He goes on to say, when the nations of the world take joint action, they are in both senses of the verb practicing global governance. They are doing something necessary and difficult, and with experience, they are learning to do it better. The article goes on to say, actually the book, in the nation that is host of the UN's headquarters, the very term global governance tends to be used with nervous caution, as though with tweezers, especially in my hometown, Washington, D.C. I noticed early in my time at the State Department that Foreign Service officers used euphemisms, of which multilateralism was one. They had learned, sometimes to the jeopardy of their careers, that public mention of global governance can be publicly radioactive. Either it has the ring of woolly mindedness, or far worse, it is taken as code for a belief in a world government that turns nations into provinces of a global superstate. To those inclined to see it that way, and there are many, the UN is a stalking horse for a conspiracy to deprive the United States of its independence and its citizens of their freedoms. Well, that's exactly what Talbot himself said it would do. In the 21st century, national sovereignty will cease to exist, and we will all answer to a single global authority. It looked like this philosophy had so taken a hold of the United States of America that there was no turning back. Many of us as Christians, knowing what the prophecy said, were praying diligently. When the election for 2016 came up, we didn't see any hope on the horizon. It looked like the same powers controlled both parties. However, when I watched the 17 Republicans line up across the podium in that first debate, right in the center was a man by the name of Donald Trump. I didn't know anything about Donald Trump. I knew he was over a thing called The Apprentice. I wasn't interested. I'd never watched The Apprentice. And so I didn't really know who Trump was or what he believed. But he quickly caught my attention because when he made his statement, he came out very strongly against globalism. Well, I knew what globalism was. Globalism is the belief in global government, the belief that the nation state is no longer an effective way to rule the world since we're in the days of the internet, of instant communication around the world. We have jet airplanes, we can travel all over the world, and consequently, Trump said there's many people who believe in globalism, but he said, I am adamantly against globalism. And then he also spoke out against the establishment. I knew what the establishment was. I knew that there were powers that had gained control of both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, so that we were basically voting for Tweedledee or Tweedledum, when no matter which party was elected, the same basic policies continued. Well, I found out later that the establishment, that there's a club in America called the Council on Foreign Relations that had provided 50% of all cabinet members in the last 50 years, whether the Republicans were in power or the Democrats were in power. No wonder the same policies continued on. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about the establishment. It was way back in 1921, actually between 1913 and 1921, that three powers were established. It was the Federal Reserve Act and the Federal Reserve Board. It was the Brookings Institute, and it was the Council on Foreign Relations. The main goal of the Council on Foreign Relations was to prepare and to educate young people, getting them ready to serve as leaders of our government. And they would indoctrinate them in the systems of global governance. Now, this was born in 1921. Believe it or not, these three organizations were all formed by one man. And this one man did not become an American citizen until 1911, and he ended up being on the Federal Reserve Board in 1913. He had only been a citizen 2 years. He was from Europe. Well, he also served as a trustee of the Council on Foreign Relations. And as I mentioned earlier, over the last 50 years, over 50% of cabinet members come from the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, whether the Republicans or the Democrats have been in power. Well, as you know now, President Trump was unexpectedly elected in 2016. He immediately began to pull the U.S. out of the different instruments of global governance. He pulled us out of the Paris Climate Change Accord, which was the horse the globalists were planning on riding to international law and international government. He pulled us out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was an international trade organization that was supposed to put all the economies of the world together. The Economist magazine said about President Trump, Trump is the world's greatest enemy to the global order. Well, let's talk a little bit now, because I'm asserting that the Bible prophesies the center for world power is in the last times, especially the final 3.5 years, is going to swing from the United States, which is where it resides basically now, to the European Union, that 28-nation union that now has their own constitution. They signed it at the Treaty of Lisbon on November the 3rd of 2009, and they now basically are a United States of Europe. Now, the Bible says that Europe is going to be the center for world power during these final 3.5 years. But could it be? I mean, is Europe powerful enough to do that? Let's look at the EU's gross domestic product. They have a yearly production of 18.8 trillion. The domestic product for the U.S. yearly is 19.39 trillion. Real close. Furthermore, though, the European Union has a debt of 13.5 trillion, but the U.S. debt is 22.7 trillion. So they have almost the same income as we do, but yet they have much, much less debt, about $9 trillion less debt. So could the European Union be strong enough to actually replace the United States of America as the strongest power on earth? Not only could they are going to, according to your Bible and according to mine. Now, the following article comes from the European Council on Foreign Relations. It's entitled, "Can Europe Save the World Order?" Now, they believe that Donald Trump is wrecking the world order because he's pulled out of the Paris Climate Change Accord. He's pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The European Council on Foreign Relations, there are many nations that have a chapter of the Council on Foreign Relations. There's the Japan Council on Foreign Relations. There's the Russian Council on Foreign Relations. There's the American Council on Foreign Relations. This international think tank has basically infiltrated all the nations of the world. Now, here's what the article says. The liberal rules-based order is under threat from both established opponents and former supporters. Europe has a vital interest in the preservation of a rules-based system, but it needs to rethink the elements of that order for a new global environment. The European Union can best support a rules-based order by ensuring its continuity at home in Europe, supporting liberal values abroad through the use of European economic power and alliances with like-minded states, and adjusting its strategy to protect the order's core elements in an era in which illiberal states have growing power. The EU should put the defense of a redesigned rules-based order at the center of its global strategy and back it up by strengthening Europe's financial independence and security capacity. The EU should also prioritize efforts to compensate for the global diplomacy deficit that U.S. President Donald Trump's policies have created. Okay, let's stop right there. Do you see where they're going? They're saying that the United States was very much a partner with us working towards global governance, toward this new world order, until this non-politician by the name of Donald Trump comes along and is unexpectedly elected. And now then the Economist magazine says he's the world's biggest threat to the New World Order. The Economist magazine is Europe's #1 magazine. It's called the Periodical of Kings and Presidents. By the way, it's owned by Lord Rothschild out of London. So we see all these forces come together, and this whole article is devoted to Europe moving in the gap when it looks like Donald Trump is wrecking the New World Order. Now they're asking the question, can Europe save the world order? That's what this whole article is all about. Now I'm going to take you a little further as soon as we get back. So could Europe save the New World Order? They thought they had it in the bag until this man by the name of Donald Trump comes along saying, we do not want to sacrifice America's independence. We don't want to trade our Declaration of Independence for a Declaration of Interdependence. We do not believe in multilateralism or global government. Remember, Strobe Talbot said, we have to use euphemisms so that the people will not know what we're really saying. We say multilateralism, but we really mean global governance. Well, Strobe Talbot said in the 21st century, national sovereignty as we have known it will cease to exist. We'll all answer to a single global authority. However, President Trump comes along and said, oh, no, we won't. We are not going to sacrifice America's independence on the altar of global governance. Let's continue on with the article from the Council on Foreign Relations out of the European Union. The world is becoming a scarier place. Trade wars loom, great power competition is returning, proxy conflict is spreading, and President Donald Trump has withdrawn the United States from the Iran nuclear deal, the Paris Agreement on climate change. Rules and alliances that once promoted international cooperation and stability seem to be losing their hold. In their place, there is a resurgence of international relations based on assertive nationalism. Now, nationalism to them is a dirty word. Recently, Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, said that nationalism is treason. Wow, strong words. Nationalism is treason? Why does he say that? Because nationalism is the enemy to global governance or to one world government. And he believes that one world government is the only answer to peace on earth, as do most of the peoples of Europe and many people here in the United States of America. So he goes on to say, based on assertive nationalism, winner takes all competition, and disdain for the rule of law. Hopes that international politics would encourage the spread of democracy and human rights have faltered, while authoritarianism and illiberalism are in the ascendant. These changes have led many people to argue that the liberal international order developed after the Second World War is breaking down. The rules-based order is under threat both from inside and outside. For most of the period since 1945, it was a joint project of the U.S. and its European allies. But now, Europe must respond to a radical shift in which the U.S. under Trump has become a significant threat to the system, to the world government that we were building. Trump's policies and disregard for European views and interests have created a crisis that compounds longer-term strains on the international order. In response, the European Union urgently needs to design and implement a strategy for preserving the core elements of a rules-based order. Now remember, I read beginning of the program, I read the scriptures, Revelation chapter 13, verse 1 and 2, that depicts a one world government and a leader of that one world government that will end up devouring the entire earth. These people dream of a one world government, of global governance, and they think that will solve our war problem. It won't. It's going to end up in the worst war we've ever known. It's a battle called the Battle of Armageddon. The article goes on to say, this policy brief attempts to work out a vision of international order that could guide the EU, the European Union, and to suggest how the EU could put this vision into practice. The EU is heavily invested in the idea of a rules-based international order. The Union exemplifies the belief that states are most able to prosper through cooperation, openness, and a rule of law that incorporates a commitment to democracy and human rights. The EU's international standing is linked to the credibility of the principles it embodies. More practically, European countries want an international order that protects them from external threats and allows them to promote their economic interests through worldwide trade and investment. European public policy is committed to the principle that multilateralism, now what did Strobe Talbot say? Multilateralism was a euphemism for global governance or world government. I said to an official from the UN one day, we were touring there, And he said, the United Nations is not in a world government, or is not world government. We are about global governance. I raised my hand and I said, could you explain to us the difference between global governance and world government? He paused, he stepped back 3 steps, swallowed real hard. He said, well, that may not be easy. Well, I knew it wasn't going to be easy because I knew global meant world, and I knew governance meant government. I looked it up in the dictionary. Governance has a one-word definition, government. I knew it was the exact same thing, but he was trying to use these euphemisms to fool us into thinking the United Nations is not planning on being a one-world government. It is world government from the top floor, the 34th floor, all the way down to the bottom. So, the EU is committed to the principle that multilateralism is the best way to create global public goods. So now you can see from this article from the Council on Foreign Relations out of the European Union, you can see what they really think. They already can see the handwriting on the wall. They see that President Trump has pulled us out of the Paris Climate Change Accord. Now you may say, wait a minute, I believe in climate change. Well, what do you mean by climate change? Do you mean the weather's going to be different tomorrow than it is today? Or do you believe that the weather is going to change so dramatically that the whole world is going to be destroyed if we don't change the weather? Now, if you think that mankind is going to change the weather, good luck. Because we never have, we never will. Do you know that the Paris Climate Change Agreement was going to cost America trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, and within the next 100 years, it would alter the temperature by 0.2%. Trillions, 0.2%. So instead of being 98 degrees, it would be 97.8 degrees. I mean, no literal difference. You say, well, why are they pushing climate change like they are then? Because climate change gives them an excuse for enacting international law. Since the air does not stop at the border and the water does not stop at the border, those are the two principal things we have to control through this theory of climate change, then we have to have international laws. And the plan is to give every single one of us a carbon footprint so that you and I are all limited to a certain amount of carbon emissions per year. If we exceed that amount, we're going to have to purchase those from another country who is not industrialized, that doesn't use all theirs. And the cost will not be cheap. So what's going to happen is, once you reach your certain quota, let's say you get there by August, that means you're going to have to pay several $1,000s for additional carbon credits in order for your heat to continue working, your water, everything else. You say, well, why in the world would they want to do that? Have you heard yet about wealth redistribution? Have you heard of social justice? They believe in the dream of Karl Marx. They're all socialist. Most of the world is socialist. Now here in America, the Democratic Party has become the Socialist Party. Did you ever think you would see a candidate, a serious candidate running for president here that was an open socialist? Well, we don't have one or two. We have many of them. Virtually every candidate running for the presidency right now in the United States of America is a socialist. I never thought I would see the day. But they bought into this system of global governance, and they believe in social justice. The Pope loves to promote it all the time. They believe in wealth redistribution, and nobody ever bothers to answer the question, if socialism is so great, why is Nicaragua broke? Why is Venezuela one of the poorest countries in South America, and they were the richest country before they adopted socialism? Why did it wreck the Soviet Union? Why? We need to ask those questions because socialism is a mirage. It does not work. But the Bible prophesies that the world government of the end time will be socialistic. If you want a picture of the end time world government, go to Revelation 17. And there you will see the same 7-headed, 10-horned beast that we started this program with. It's there again in Revelation 17, only this time it's red. Have you ever heard of red China? Red Russia? Red Romania? Red is the official color of socialism. The Bible prophesies this last day global governance instrument, this last day world government, will be a socialist government. Now, is it happening right now? Do you realize who the Secretary General of the United Nations is today? He's the world's #1 socialist. Antonio Guterres, he was the president of Portugal at the head of the Socialist Party. After that, he became the president of the Socialist International. They have an international organization called Socialist International. Socialists from every country on earth belong to it. He was the head of the Socialist International. Then he became the Secretary General of the United Nations, the organization designed to be a one world government. We have a dyed in the wool. The world's #1 socialist is the head of the world government called the United Nations today. How did he get that job? Well, you do know that the United States of America has veto power when it's time to elect the next Secretary General. But we didn't veto his name, even though we knew he was a dyed-in-the-wool socialist. He had come from being president of the Socialist International. We didn't veto his name, but we pushed his adoption. Who did that? That happened in 2015 under the Obama administration. Does that mean Obama wanted a socialist to head the one world governmental system for this system of multilateralism? And that's what President Trump is turning on its ear right now? Well, ladies and gentlemen, now you know and now you understand.